The town of Riverdale prided itself on patriotism. Flags waved on porches, yellow ribbons adorned oak trees, and school children recited the pledge each morning. Yet when Master Sergeant Elijah Ward, a decorated black soldier with 2 tours in Afghanistan, walked into his son's talent show wearing full dress uniform, security didn't see a hero. They saw a problem. "Your name's not on the list," they insisted, as Elijah's 10-year-old son Jalen watched from backstage, tears welling in his eyes. The video of Elijah's humiliating removal spread overnight, reaching 6 Navy SEALs who recognized the man who had once risked everything to save them behind enemy lines. While Elijah sat alone in his empty house, metal case open on the coffee table, and his son's invitation crumpled in his fist, Commander Ellis made a single phone call. "It's time we repaid our debt." Small towns have long memories, but so do soldiers. And sometimes justice arrives in formation. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The alarm clock blared at 4:45 a.m., but Master Sergeant Elijah Ward was already awake. He'd been lying in bed for almost an hour, watching the ceiling fan rotate above him in the dim pre-dawn light. Sleep never came easy these days, not since he'd returned home. Elijah swung his feet to the floor and sat up, running his hands over his close-cropped hair. The house was silent, except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a family heirloom he'd rescued from his parents' estate sale. He made his way to the bathroom, catching his reflection in the mirror. The deep lines around his eyes and mouth told the story of his 42 years, many spent under foreign suns. After a quick shower, Elijah walked to his closet and pulled out his dress uniform. It had been hanging there untouched for months, protected by a clear plastic cover. He ran his fingers over the fabric, feeling the weight of the metals pinned to the chest. Each one represented a memory. Some he cherished, others he wished he could forget. He took a small brush from his dresser and carefully dusted each metal, his movements precise and deliberate. The Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, the Army Commendation Medal. Each one gleamed under his attentive care. On the dresser sat a framed photograph of his son, Jalen. The boy was grinning wide, holding up a school certificate. Elijah picked it up, his weathered fingers tracing the outline of his son's face. 10 years old now, growing up so fast, mostly without him around. Too fast, Elijah whispered to himself. He placed the photograph carefully back on the dresser and continued his morning routine, pressing his uniform with military precision. The house around him was modest but immaculate, a small 3-bedroom ranch on the outskirts of town that he'd purchased after his divorce from Catherine. It wasn't much, but it was his. A place where Jalen could visit on the weekends when Catherine allowed it. As Elijah worked, his mind drifted back to the sandstorms and gunfire. The memory came without warning, the hot desert air, the sound of bullets whizzing past his head, the weight of his fellow soldier as he dragged him across the burning sand. "Stay with me, Palmer. Don't you dare check out on me now." The man's blood had soaked through Elijah's uniform, warm and sticky against his skin. The desert sun beat down mercilessly as Elijah pulled him behind a crumbling wall, bullets kicking up sand all around them. Elijah blinked hard, forcing himself back to the present. His hands were gripping the ironing board so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. 5 years since that day, and still the memories ambushed him when he least expected it. The doorbell rang, jolting him fully back to reality. Elijah glanced at the clock, barely 7 a.m. Who would be at his door this early? He made his way through the living room, his bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. Through the peephole, he saw a young girl on a bike, maybe 12 or 13, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Yes?" Elijah asked as he opened the door. "Are you Mr. Ward?" the girl asked, her voice high and uncertain. "Master Sergeant Ward," Elijah corrected automatically, then softened. "But yes, that's me. This is for you." She thrust an envelope toward him. "Jalen asked me to deliver it. He said it was important." Elijah accepted the envelope, noting Jalen's messy handwriting across the front. "Thank you," he said, reaching into his pocket for a tip, But the girl was already pedaling away, her ponytail bouncing behind her. He closed the door and examined the envelope. It was sealed with a sticker of a musical note. Elijah smiled slightly. Music had always been Jalen's passion. Inside was a handmade card, decorated with drawings of musical instruments. Elijah's heart swelled as he read the childish scrawl. Dad, there's a talent show at school next Friday at 7 p.m. I'm playing the piano and singing a song I wrote myself. Mom says you might be busy, but I really want you to come. Please come in uniform, Dad. I told everyone how brave you are. Love. Jalen. Elijah checked the date on his wall calendar and froze. May 15th. The same date his unit had been ambushed 5 years ago. The same day he'd dragged 6 men to safety and lost 2 others. The anniversary always hit him hard. He usually spent it alone with a bottle of whiskey and his memories. But now Jalen was asking him to be there. To show up, in uniform, no less. Elijah sank onto the couch, the invitation clutched in his hand. Memories and duty warred within him. He'd missed so much already. Birthdays, school events, everyday moments. First because of his deployments, then because of the divorce. The phone rang, breaking his reverie. Catherine's name flashed on the screen. Elijah took a steadying breath before answering. Elijah, Catherine's voice was clipped. Did you get Jalen's invitation? Just now, Elijah replied. I'll be there. A pause. Look, I know it's the anniversary of what happened. If you can't make it. I said I'll be there, Catherine. Elijah cut her off. I promised Jalen. Another pause. Fine, but Ronald will be there too. He's been helping Jalen prepare for weeks. Ronald Davis, Catherine's new husband, a city council member with political aspirations who had never served a day in uniform but had plenty of opinions about those who had. I'm not coming for Ronald, Elijah said. I'm coming for my son. Just don't make a scene, okay? This is important to Jalen. When have I ever made a scene, Catherine? The question hung in the air between them, unanswered. After Catherine hung up, Elijah returned to his uniform, now perfectly pressed. He laid it carefully across his bed, making sure every detail was perfect. For Jalen, he would face his demons. For Jalen, he would show up with his head held high, medals gleaming despite the whispers and stares that always followed him in this town. Meanwhile, at Lincoln Elementary School, Catherine Davis stood in the auditorium, clipboard in hand, overseeing the preparations for the talent show. As the head of the PTA, she took pride in ensuring every school event ran smoothly. Mom, Jalen called, running up to her. His dark eyes, so like Elijah's, were bright with excitement. Did Dad get my invitation? Is he coming? Catherine hesitated. I just spoke with him, honey. He says he'll try. Jalen's face fell slightly. But I really want him to come. I wrote the song for him. I know, sweetheart, but you know how busy your father can be, Catherine said, trying to soften the blow. And sometimes it's hard for him to be around lots of people. Because of his PTSD, Jalen asked, the clinical term sounding strange from his young mouth. Ronald says Dad uses that as an excuse. Catherine shot a glance at her husband, who was chatting with Principal Sloan near the stage. Ronald shouldn't say things like that to you. Your father, he saw some very difficult things during his service. He's a hero, Jalen said firmly. He saved people's lives. Yes, he did, Catherine agreed softly. There had been a time when she'd looked at Elijah with the same admiration she now saw in her son's eyes. Before the nightmares, before the silences, before everything became too much. Ronald approached, placing a proprietary hand on Catherine's shoulder. How's my favorite musician? He asked Jalen with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Dad's coming to the show, Jalen announced. In his uniform. Ronald's smile tightened. Is that so? Well, we'll have to make sure he's on the guest list then, won't we? He's my dad, Jalen said, a note of defiance in his voice. He doesn't need to be on a list. Everyone needs to be on the list, buddy, Ronald said, his tone condescending. "It's for security purposes. We can't just have anyone walking in off the street." "He's not just anyone," Jalen insisted. "He's my dad." "Jalen," Catherine warned, seeing the stubborn set of her son's jaw, another trait inherited from Elijah. "You don't know him like I do," Jalen said, his voice rising. "He's a hero. Everyone should know that." He stormed off toward the stage, leaving Catherine and Ronald staring after him. "That boy has too much of his father in him," Ronald muttered. Catherine sighed. "He idolizes Elijah. Always has." "Well, let's hope Sergeant Ward doesn't disappoint him." Again. Ronald squeezed her shoulder before walking away, leaving Catherine alone with her thoughts. The evening of the talent show arrived crisp and clear. Elijah dressed with methodical care, each button and pin placed with precision. He'd polished his shoes until they gleamed like black mirrors, and his uniform fit him perfectly. Despite the weight he'd lost since returning home, he arrived at the school 30 minutes early, parking his truck at the far end of the lot. For a moment, he sat there, gathering his courage. The school was already bustling with activity, parents and children streaming through the doors, excited chatter filling the air. Elijah took a deep breath, grabbed his cap, and stepped out of the truck. He could feel eyes on him immediately. In this small town, a man in full dress uniform stood out like a bonfire in the night. He walked with measured steps toward the entrance, his posture ramrod straight. A few parents nodded respectfully, others averted their eyes. Elijah was used to both reactions. Inside, the school gymnasium had been transformed into an auditorium, with rows of folding chairs facing a makeshift stage. Colorful banners declaring, "Lincoln Elementary Talent Showcase" hung from the walls. Elijah quietly made his way to a seat in the back row, not wanting to draw attention, but attention found him anyway. Two security officers standing near the entrance noticed him almost immediately. Officer Griggs, a heavy-set man with thinning hair, nudged his partner and whispered something. Officer Bell, younger and more fit, frowned as they both studied Elijah. Elijah felt their gaze but kept his eyes forward, scanning the program he'd been handed at the door. Jalen was scheduled to perform halfway through the show. There was still time to settle in, to prepare himself for seeing his son on stage. The officers approached, moving casually but purposefully through the growing crowd. "Excuse me, sir, officer," Griggs said, his voice carrying just enough authority to turn nearby heads. "Can I help you with something?" Elijah looked up. "No, thank you. I'm here for the talent show." "Do you have a child performing tonight?" Bell asked, his hand resting casually on his belt. "My son, Jalen Ward," Elijah replied, reaching into his pocket to pull out the invitation. "He invited me personally." Bell glanced at the handmade card, but didn't take it. "I'm sorry, sir, but we need to check the approved guest list. Security protocol." More heads were turning now. Whispers spread through the nearby seats. "I'm Jalen's father," Elijah explained, keeping his voice even. "Master Sergeant Elijah Ward." "I understand, sir, but your name needs to be on the list," Griggs insisted. "These measures are for the children's safety." Elijah's jaw tightened. "Is there someone I can speak with? Principal Sloan, perhaps?" "Principal Sloan is busy preparing for the event," Bell said. "I'm afraid she's not available right now." The crowd around them had grown quiet, watching the exchange with undisguised interest. Elijah was acutely aware of the spectacle they were creating, exactly what he'd hoped to avoid. "Could you check the list again?" Elijah asked, struggling to keep his voice calm. "I'm sure my ex-wife would have included me. Catherine Davis. She's head of the PTA." The officers exchanged glances. "Mrs. Davis is very thorough with her lists," Griggs said carefully. "If your name isn't there, there's a reason." From across the room, Elijah caught sight of Ronald Davis sitting in the front row. Their eyes met briefly, and Ronald quickly looked away, leaning to whisper something to Catherine. "Look," Bell said, his voice dropping. "We're going to ask you to leave. We can't have unauthorized personnel at school events." "Unauthorized?" Elijah repeated, his voice tight. "I'm here to see my son perform." "Sir, please don't make this difficult," Griggs said, placing a hand on Elijah's shoulder. The touch sent a jolt through Elijah's body. Suddenly, he wasn't in a school gymnasium anymore. He was back in the desert, sand in his mouth, the weight of a wounded man on his shoulders, enemy fire all around him. Elijah stiffened, his body going rigid under the officer's hand. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. A parent in the third row had their phone out, recording the confrontation. Others whispered urgently to each other. The tension in the air was palpable, suffocating. Slowly, deliberately, Elijah stood. He was taller than both officers, his presence commanding despite their authority. Pride and pain warred in his expression as he straightened to his full height, shoulders back, chin up, the stance of a soldier who would not be broken. "I'd like to speak with Principal Sloan," Elijah said, his voice quiet but firm. The gymnasium had grown eerily silent, all attention focused on the confrontation unfolding in the back row. Officer Griggs shook his head. "As I said, she's not available right now. Please, sir, don't make this any more difficult than it needs to be." "I'm not trying to make anything difficult," Elijah replied. "I just want to see my son perform." "Your name is not on the approved list," Officer Bell insisted, his hand still hovering near his belt. "We have protocols to follow." More parents had turned in their seats to watch. Someone whispered, "Who is that?" Another replied, "Some soldier causing trouble." The murmurs spread like ripples in a pond. A woman in the middle row held her phone, up higher, making sure to capture every moment of the confrontation. The red recording light was visible from where Elijah stood, a tiny glaring eye watching the scene unfold. "I have an invitation," Elijah tried again, holding up Jalen's handmade card. "From my son." "That's not official documentation," Griggs said, his patience visibly wearing thin. "Now, we need you to exit the building, sir." At the front of the auditorium, Ronald Davis sat with perfect posture, his arm draped casually over the back of Catherine's chair. He leaned over to whisper something in her ear, a small, satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Catherine glanced back at the commotion, her expression troubled. She nudged Ronald and whispered something urgent. He shrugged, unconcerned. "This is what happens when people don't follow protocol," Ronald whispered back, loud enough that the parents in the adjacent seats could hear. "Rules exist for a reason." A few of those parents nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and avoiding eye contact with each other. Meanwhile, backstage, the children were peeking through the curtains, trying to see what was causing the disturbance. Jalen, dressed in his best clothes, a crisp white shirt and bow tie that he'd insisted on wearing, pushed to the front of the group. "What's going on?" he asked Lisa Taylor, his music teacher. "Why is everyone looking at the back?" Before she could answer, Jalen spotted the familiar uniform, his face lit up with recognition and pride. "Dad!" he called out, his voice carrying across the now silent gymnasium. "Dad, I'm here!" He tried to dart out from behind the curtain, but Ms. Taylor caught him by the shoulder. "Jalen, wait, something's happening. You need to stay backstage." "But that's my dad," Jalen protested, struggling against her grip. "They're making him leave. Dad!" Back at the entrance, Elijah heard his son's voice. His expression, carefully controlled until now, cracked slightly. He looked toward the stage, where Jalen was being held back by his teacher, the boy's face a mixture of confusion and distress. "I'll go," Elijah said quietly to the officers. "I don't want to cause a scene." "Too late for that," Griggs muttered, taking Elijah's arm firmly. The touch triggered another flash of memory, rough hands pulling him away from the wounded, orders to stand down, to leave men behind. Elijah's muscles tensed, but he forced himself to remain calm. This wasn't the battlefield. This was his son's school. As the officers began to escort him toward the exit, applause broke out from a section of the audience, parents who approved of the removal of this apparent security threat. Others sat in uncomfortable silence, witnessing but not intervening. Elijah walked with dignity, his back straight, medals gleaming under the fluorescent lights. As he passed the stage, he looked directly at Jalen and managed a small nod. "I'm proud of you," he mouthed silently to his son, before allowing himself to be led outside into the cool evening air. Behind him, The door closed with a heavy thud. Elijah stood alone in the parking lot, the distant sounds of the talent show starting, up again inside. He looked down at Jalen's invitation, still clutched in his hand, the colorful drawings now slightly crumpled. Inside, Principal Sloan had taken the stage, her expression harried. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the brief disturbance. The show will continue as planned with a slight change to our program. The next performance will be, 'What about Jalen?'" A child's voice called from the audience. Principal Sloan hesitated. "I'm afraid Jalen Ward's performance has been canceled for this evening. Moving on to our next performer." Backstage, Jalen had broken free from Ms. Taylor and was now standing at the side entrance, watching as his father's figure disappeared into the darkness of the parking lot. Tears streamed down his face. "I worked so hard," he whispered. "I wanted him to hear my song." When Ms. Taylor approached him again, gently suggesting he prepare for his performance, Jalen shook his head firmly. "I'm not playing," he said, his young voice thick with emotion. "Not anymore." He ran deeper backstage, finding a quiet corner among the stored gymnasium equipment. There, he pulled his knees to his chest and let the tears come freely. The sheet. Music for his composition crumpled in his fist. The talent show continued without Jalen's performance. Parents applauded politely for the other children, but an undercurrent of tension remained in the room. The incident had cast a shadow over what should have been a joyful evening. Catherine sat rigidly in her seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When Ronald reached for her hand during one of the performances, she pulled away subtly, her eyes fixed on the stage. "They didn't have to humiliate him like that," she whispered. "Not in front of Jalen." "He should have called ahead," Ronald replied without looking at her. "He knows the procedures." Catherine didn't respond. She was remembering the early days of her relationship with Elijah, his quiet strength, his unwavering sense of duty. Before the deployment stretched longer, before the silences between them grew too vast to bridge. After the final performance, Catherine searched frantically backstage for Jalen, finally finding him still huddled in his hiding spot, his eyes red-rimmed but dry now. "Sweetheart," she began, reaching for him. Jalen pulled away. "You told me he would come, and he did, and they made him leave." "I didn't know," Catherine said, though even to her own ears the words sounded hollow. "I didn't know they would do that." "Did Ronald know?" Jalen asked, suddenly looking much older than his 10 years. "Did he make this happen?" Catherine hesitated too long before answering, and Jalen saw the truth in her eyes. "I want to go home," he said flatly. "I want to go to Dad's home." "Jalen, you know this is your weekend with us." "I don't care," Jalen interrupted, a rare defiance in his voice. "I want to see Dad." Later that night, Elijah sat alone in his living room, still in his uniform. He hadn't found the energy to change. The invitation lay on the coffee table before him, next to an untouched glass of whiskey. His phone buzzed with a notification. A text message from an unknown number contained a link to a video. Elijah clicked on it hesitantly. The video showed his confrontation with the security officers, filmed from the perspective of someone in the audience. It had already accumulated thousands of views and hundreds of comments. Hashtags like "Taish honor him" and "Taish not on the list" were trending locally. As Elijah watched himself being escorted out, his face impassive despite the humiliation, his phone rang. The screen displayed Principal Sloan's name. He let it ring several times before answering. "Master Sergeant Ward," he said formally. "Sergeant Ward." Principal Sloan's voice was strained. "I've just seen the footage of what happened tonight. I want to express my personal apologies. I had no idea." "What about my son?" Elijah interrupted. "Is Jalen all right?" A pause. "He refused to perform after you left. He was very upset." Elijah closed his eyes, pain washing over him. Another moment stolen from them both. "I'd like to meet with you," Principal Sloan continued, "to discuss what happened and how we can make this right." "Make it right?" Elijah repeated, a rare edge entering his voice. "My son saw his father treated like a criminal. How exactly do you propose to make that right, Principal Sloan?" She had no answer for him. After hanging up, Elijah finally removed his uniform jacket, carefully hanging it in the closet. As he did, he caught sight of a small photograph tucked into the inside pocket, a much younger version of himself and Catherine, with baby Jalen between them. They were smiling, unaware of what lay ahead. Across town, Officers Bell and Griggs were finishing their shift, removing their security blazers in the school's small office. "That got out of hand fast," Bell said, his voice low. "Did you see the look on that kid's face?" Griggs shrugged. "We were just doing our job, following protocol." "Yeah, but a decorated veteran at his own kid's show?" Bell shook his head. "Doesn't sit right." "Orders are orders," Griggs replied flatly. "Military. Man like him should understand that better than anyone." Bell said nothing more. But as he drove home that night, the image of Elijah Ward's dignified exit haunted him. The rigid posture, the carefully controlled expression, the medals that told a story Bell suspected he couldn't begin to comprehend. As midnight approached, a luxury sedan pulled up across from Elijah's modest home. The interior lights were off, but the silhouette of a man was visible behind the wheel. He sat watching the house for several minutes, the blue glow of a phone illuminating his gray hair and weathered face. Commander William Ellis, retired Navy SEAL, had seen the video. He'd recognized Elijah instantly, the man who had once risked everything to save him and 5 others, the man whose career had been quietly sacrificed afterward. Ellis made a phone call, speaking in a low, authoritative voice. "It's time," he said simply. "Ward needs us now." He ended the call and continued his silent vigil, a sentinel in the darkness, watching over a brother in arms who had once done the same for him. The morning after the talent show, Principal Diana Sloan sat in her office, staring at her computer screen. The video of Elijah Ward being escorted out of the school had spread far beyond their small town overnight. Local news outlets had picked it up, and her email inbox was flooded with messages. Some expressing outrage, others support for the school's security measures. A knock at her door broke her concentration. Her assistant poked her head in. "Master Sergeant Ward is here for your meeting." Diana took a deep breath and straightened her blazer. "Send him in, please." Elijah entered wearing civilian clothes, dark, jeans and a simple button-down shirt. Without his uniform, he seemed somehow both more approachable and more vulnerable. The absence of medals didn't diminish his bearing, though. He stood tall, his gaze direct and unwavering. "Sergeant Ward, thank you for coming," Diana said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "I appreciate you making time to meet." "I'm here because my son deserves answers," Elijah replied, taking the seat. "And so do I." Diana nodded. Guilt etched across her face. "I've been conducting an internal investigation since last night. What happened was inexcusable." She turned her computer screen toward him. "Your name was on the original guest list. I approved it myself." The screen showed a spreadsheet with a highlighted entry. "Ward, Elijah, Jalen's father. Approved. But someone removed it just hours before the event," she continued. "The system logs show the change was made yesterday afternoon, but not who made it." Elijah's jaw tightened. "I think we both know who was behind it." Diana hesitated. "I can't make accusations without proof, Sergeant Ward, but I promise you I will get to the bottom of this." "My son saw me thrown out like a criminal," Elijah said, his voice controlled but intense. "Do you understand what that does to a child? To see his father, a soldier, treated that way?" "I do," Diana said quietly. "And I'm truly sorry. Jalen is a remarkable boy. His talent, his sensitivity." She trailed off, then straightened. "I want to make this right. How do you propose to do that?" "We'll be holding another showcase in 2 weeks. I'm personally inviting you as an honored guest. Jalen can perform his piece." "It's not about another performance," Elijah interrupted. "It's about respect. Not just for me, but for what the uniform represents." He leaned forward. "Do you know what Jalen said when he gave me that invitation? He said he was proud of me. Proud." His voice caught slightly on the word. And then he watched me get escorted out like I was a threat. Diana had no response to that. After a moment of heavy silence, she spoke again. Jalen hasn't come to school since the incident. Is he all right? No, Elijah answered simply. He's not. Jalen had indeed been absent from school for 2 days. Instead, he'd been at Elijah's house, refusing to return to Catherine's despite her increasingly desperate phone calls. He'd spent most of that time in Elijah's home office, scribbling in a notebook, only emerging for meals which he ate in near silence. On the evening of the second day, Elijah found Jalen sitting cross-legged on his bed, guitar in hand, playing a melancholy tune. That sounds nice, Elijah said from the doorway. New song? Jalen nodded without looking up. I'm calling it, The Man in Uniform. It's about you. Elijah sat on the edge of the bed. Your mom called again. She's worried about you. Jalen's fingers stilled on the strings. Did she tell you what Ronald did? What do you mean? I heard them fighting last night before I came here. Mom said it was Ronald who told the school not to let you in. Jalen's young face hardened. She said he made a judgment call about you showing up. Elijah carefully controlled his expression, but inside, anger flared hot and bright. You shouldn't worry about adult problems, Jalen. I'm not a little kid anymore, Dad, Jalen said, looking up with eyes too serious for his age. I know what Ronald thinks about you. He says things when Mom's not around. What kind of things? That you're unstable. That you use your PTSD as an excuse. Jalen's voice grew quieter. That you abandoned us. Elijah felt as if he'd been struck. He'd never abandoned his family. It was the deployments, then the divorce, circumstances that had pulled him away despite his best efforts to hold everything together. Jalen, he began, searching for the right words. Sometimes adults say things out of anger or jealousy or fear. It doesn't make them true. I know who you are, Dad, Jalen said fiercely. You're a hero. You saved people. That's why they gave you all those medals. Elijah swallowed hard. How could he explain to his 10-year-old son that heroism often came with a cost? That sometimes the medals commemorated the worst days of your life? I need to ask you something important, Elijah said, changing the subject. Are you ready to go back to school tomorrow? Your friends miss you. Your teachers, too. Jalen looked down at his guitar. Will you take me? I don't want to go with Mom and Ronald. If that's what you want, sure. And will you wear your uniform? Elijah hesitated. Jalen. Please, Dad, Jalen interrupted. I want everyone to see. I want them to know who you really are. Sometimes it's better to just blend in, son. Is that what they taught you in the army? To blend in when things get hard? The question, so innocent yet so pointed, hit Elijah like a physical blow. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. No, he admitted. They taught me to stand my ground. Jalen smiled for the first time in days. Then that's what we'll do. That night, after Jalen had finally fallen asleep, Elijah's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he hadn't seen in years, but would never forget. Ward, he answered. Hey, Sarge, came a familiar voice, rough around the edges but warm with affection. It's Doc Ramirez. Manuel, Doc Ramirez, had been the medic assigned to the SEAL team Elijah had rescued. They'd spent 3 days together in a field hospital afterward, forming the kind of bond that only exists between those who have stared death in the face together. Doc, Elijah said, surprised. It's been a while. Saw the video, Doc said without preamble. You getting tossed out of your kid's school. That's some serious bullshit. Elijah sighed. It's complicated. No, it's not. It's disrespect, plain and simple. Doc's voice hardened. Time to return the favor, brother. What are you talking about? I called the others. Cole, Nguyen, Lawson, Moreno, even Commander Ellis. We all saw what happened. Elijah's stomach tightened. Doc, I don't need you guys to fight my battles. That's exactly what you said in Fallujah. Remember? Right before you disobeyed direct orders and dragged our sorry asses out of that hellhole. The memory washed over Elijah in vivid detail, the crackle of gunfire, the thick, choking dust, the metallic smell of blood. His unit had been ordered to hold position, to wait for air support. But Elijah had heard the radio chatter, knew that. A SEAL team was pinned down half a click away, with no chance of surviving until the choppers arrived. He'd made a choice then, risking his career and his life to save 6 men he'd never met. That was different, Elijah said quietly. No, it wasn't. You stood up for what was right then, and we're going to do the same for you now. Doc's voice softened. How's your boy holding up? He's angry, confused. Elijah glanced toward Jalen's room. He's writing songs about it. Chip off the old block, turning pain into something better. Doc chuckled. We'll be there soon, Sarge, all of us. Doc, seriously. Too late. Already bought my ticket. See you in a couple days. The line went dead, leaving Elijah staring at his phone in disbelief. What had Doc meant by all of us? Surely the entire team wasn't planning to descend on his small town. But even as he tried to dismiss the idea, a part of him, the part that had felt isolated and alone for so long, warmed at the thought of seeing his brothers in arms again. Across town, Catherine sat in her elegant living room, arms wrapped around herself as she faced her husband. You deliberately had Elijah's name removed from the list, didn't you? Ronald Davis straightened his tie, unruffled by her accusation. I made a judgment call about allowing Ward to attend. The man is unstable, Catherine. You know that better than anyone. He's Jalen's father, Catherine said, her voice rising. You had no right. I had every right, Ronald replied coldly. As a member of the school board, I'm responsible for ensuring a safe environment for all students. Ward showing up unannounced in full military regalia. He was invited, Catherine cut in, by his son. Was a potential disruption, Ronald continued as if she hadn't spoken. And I was proven right, wasn't I? The whole evening was derailed because of him. Because of what you did, Catherine corrected. The board is furious, Ronald. Principal Sloan is conducting an investigation. If they find out you tampered with the guest list, they won't, Ronald said confidently. And even if they did, I'd simply explain that I was acting in the best interest of the school. After all, everyone knows Ward's history. Catherine stared at him, suddenly seeing her husband in a different light. What do you mean, his history? Ronald smiled thinly. Let's just say his military record isn't as spotless as those shiny medals might suggest. What are you talking about? Instead of answering, Ronald checked his watch. I'm late for a campaign meeting. We'll discuss this later. As he left, Catherine remained on the couch, a sick feeling growing in her stomach. She thought of Jalen, who had refused to come home, and of Elijah, who, despite everything, had never spoken ill of her to their son. What had happened to the idealistic woman she'd once been, who had fallen in love with a soldier's integrity and courage? When had she started doubting the man who had once been her whole world? Meanwhile, across the country, 6 men began making travel arrangements. They were scattered now, California, Texas, Virginia, Florida. But the call had gone out, and none of them hesitated. They owed Elijah Ward a debt that could never truly be repaid. But they could start by standing beside him now when he needed them most. The memory that bound them together was seared into each of their minds. A classified mission gone terribly wrong. Enemy forces overwhelming their position. Ammunition running low. Wounded men unable to move. Radio calls for evacuation denied due to weather conditions and enemy anti-aircraft positions. And then, like something out of a movie, a lone army sergeant appearing through the dust and smoke, ignoring orders to stay back, risking everything to reach them. Over the course of a brutal night, he had made 3 separate trips into enemy territory, dragging wounded SEALs to safety one by one. For his actions, Elijah had received a Silver Star and a formal reprimand for disobeying direct orders. The mission itself had been buried in classified reports, the full story never made public. But the men he saved remembered. They would always remember. Back in town, word of the incident at the school continued to spread. Local veterans organizations caught wind of the story, and began organizing support for Elijah. Letters flooded the school board, demanding a public apology. Social media buzzed with outrage. Ronald's campaign team warned him that the situation was spiraling. "This could damage your city council run," his campaign manager said bluntly. "Military families vote, and they're pissed." Ronald dismissed the concerns. "It'll blow over. These social media firestorms always do. By next week, they'll be upset about something else." But he underestimated the depth of feeling the incident had provoked. The next morning, a group of students gathered outside the school carrying handmade signs. "Veterans deserve respect," and "Bring back Jalen." Principal Sloan watched from her office window, torn between pride in her students' civic engagement and concern about the disruption. When the local news crews arrived to cover the protest, she knew the situation had escalated beyond her control. That afternoon, Elijah received a text message from Commander Ellis. "Meet me at Pioneer Park, 1400 hours. Come alone." Pioneer Park was quiet on a weekday afternoon. Elijah found Ellis sitting on a bench near the pond, feeding breadcrumbs to the ducks. Despite being in his 60s now, the former SEAL commander maintained the alert posture and watchful eyes of a man accustomed to assessing threats. "Sergeant Ward," Ellis said, standing to shake Elijah's hand. "It's been too long." "Commander," Elijah replied with respect. "I'm surprised to see you here." Ellis gestured for Elijah to sit. "I've been following your situation. Quite the mess they've made for you." "It's just small-town politics," Elijah said, trying to downplay it. "It'll blow over." Ellis fixed him with a penetrating stare. "You and I both know it's more than that. This is about honor, about respect for the uniform and what it represents." Elijah said nothing, but the tightness around his eyes spoke volumes. "I've called them," Ellis continued. "They're coming." "Doc mentioned something about that," Elijah admitted. "But it's not necessary." "It is necessary," Ellis insisted. "Not just for you, but for them. For all of us." He leaned closer. "You gave us a second chance at life, Ward. Now it's our turn to stand with you." As the sun began to set over the park, casting long shadows across the grass, Elijah realized that sometimes battles chose you rather than the other way around. And sometimes, the most powerful weapon wasn't force, but the loyalty of those who knew your true worth. 3 days later, Elijah walked into Miller's Diner on Main Street, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't since his last deployment. The hostess smiled and pointed toward the back, where a group of men occupied the large corner booth. They spotted him immediately. As one, they rose to their feet and snapped to attention, offering perfect salutes that spoke of years of military discipline. The diner fell silent, all eyes turning toward the unexpected display of military protocol. Elijah returned the salute, then broke into a rare, genuine smile as the men surrounded him, enveloping him in bear hugs and backslaps. "Look what the desert dragged in," said Thomas Reaper Cole, a towering black man with a shaved head and a booming laugh. "Still standing tall, Sarge." "Barely," Elijah admitted, as David Shade Nguyen, the team's former communications specialist, embraced him next. "You look like hell," Nguyen said with a grin. "Civilian life not treating you right?" "Apparently not," chimed in Manuel Doc Ramirez, gesturing to the booth. "Let's sit. We've got a lot to discuss." The 6 former SEALs and Elijah squeezed into the booth, immediately falling into the easy camaraderie of men who had shared life and death situations. The other diners watched with curious eyes, conversations dropping to whispers as they speculated about the gathering. "So," James Boomer Lawson said, leaning forward, "walk us through exactly what happened." Elijah recounted the events of the talent show night, keeping his voice low and steady. As he spoke, the expressions of the men around him darkened. "This Ronald guy," Cole said when Elijah finished. "He's running for city council?" Elijah nodded. "He's well connected. Old money family, friends on all the right boards and committees." "Perfect," Cole said with a predatory smile. "That means there's a paper trail." Michael Ghost Moreno, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke. "We need to establish a base of operations, somewhere private, where we can plan. The community center on Oak Street has a back room they let veterans use, Elijah suggested. It's nothing fancy, but it's private. Good, Commander Ellis said decisively. We'll set up there tomorrow morning. Nguyen, I want you to start digging into the school board's communications. Cole, focus on this Ronald character, background, finances, campaign connections, everything. Sir, Nguyen said hesitantly, some of what you're suggesting might not be strictly legal. Ellis fixed him with a steady gaze. We're not breaking any laws. We're just gathering information that should be public anyway. Transparency is the enemy of corruption. The men nodded in agreement. Elijah looked around at them, these elite warriors who had dropped everything to come to his aid, and felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with his old injuries. I don't know what to say, he admitted. You all have lives, responsibilities. You didn't have to come. Yes, we did, Doc said simply. You know exactly why. The next morning, the former SEALs established their makeshift headquarters in the back room of the community center. Ellis had brought in a whiteboard, which was quickly filled with names, connections, and timelines. Cole set up a laptop and began working his contacts in local government. Ronald Davis, he announced to the room, is not as squeaky clean as he wants people to think. 3 years ago, he was on the Housing Commission, and there were some complaints about discriminatory practices. Can we prove it? Ellis asked. Working on it, Cole replied, but it establishes a pattern. Meanwhile, Nguyen had been focused on the school board's digital communications. His fingers flew over his keyboard, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. You're not going to believe this, he said suddenly. I found a document called Guest Risk Tier System. It categorizes potential school visitors based on community image impact. The men gathered around his laptop, reading over his shoulder. This is racial profiling, Moreno said, his voice tight with anger. Look at the language they're using. Cultural fit, community standards, image consideration. It's all coded. And guess who helped implement it? Nguyen scrolled to the bottom of the document. Ronald Davis, Special Advisor to the Board. Elijah's jaw clenched. So this wasn't just about me. It's systematic. Exactly, Ellis confirmed. And that's how we're going to fight it. Not just for you, but for everyone they've excluded. While the team continued their investigation, Officer Bell had been wrestling with his conscience. The video of Elijah being escorted out had gone viral, and the backlash had been intense. He'd received angry messages from fellow veterans and community members, questioning how he could treat a decorated soldier that way. After a sleepless night, Bell made a decision. He drove to Elijah's house and knocked on the door. His heart pounding, Elijah looked surprised to see him. Officer Bell. Mr. Ward, Bell said, removing his cap. I'd like to speak with you if you have a moment. Elijah hesitated, then stepped back to allow Bell inside. The living room was sparse but neat, with military precision evident in every carefully arranged item. I came to apologize, Bell said, standing awkwardly in the center of the room. What happened at the school? It wasn't right. Elijah said nothing, waiting. Bell reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. This is a copy of the original guest list for the talent show. Your name was on it. He handed the paper to Elijah. Someone removed it manually just hours before the event. Elijah unfolded the paper and saw his name clearly printed, then crossed out with a single line of ink. Do you know who did this? He asked. Bell shook his head. Not officially, but there were only a few people with access to the list that day. Thank you for bringing this to me, Elijah said. It couldn't have been an easy decision. It wasn't, Bell admitted. But my father was a Marine. He taught me that honor matters more than following orders blindly. He looked Elijah in the eye. I'm sorry for my part in what happened to you, sir. As Bell was leaving, a car pulled into the driveway. Catherine stepped out, looking nervous and determined all at once. Elijah, she called, then noticed Officer Bell. Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just leaving, ma'am, Bell said, nodding respectfully before getting into his patrol car and driving away. Catherine watched him go, then turned back to Elijah. Was that about what happened at the school? Yes, Elijah said simply. What brings you here, Catherine? She hesitated, then squared her shoulders. I've been seeing the news stories, the protests at the school, and I've been doing a lot of thinking, her voice caught. About us, about what went wrong. Elijah's expression remained carefully neutral. It's been 5 years, Catherine. Ancient history. Is it? She challenged. Because it seems to me like we're still living with the consequences. Jalen certainly is. She stepped closer, her eyes filling with tears. I heard about what you did. The mission that got you those medals. Ronald had a file. Ronald had what? Elijah interrupted, suddenly alert. A file on you. On the mission in Fallujah. Catherine looked away, ashamed. He used it somehow, with the school board. I don't know all the details, but I know it wasn't right. Elijah absorbed this information silently, the pieces falling into place. His classified mission, his reprimand for disobeying orders. Somehow Ronald had accessed that information and used it against him. I'm so sorry, Elijah, Catherine said, tears now flowing freely. For doubting you, for letting Ronald poison Jalen against you, for everything. Elijah had imagined this moment many times over the years, Catherine apologizing, admitting she'd been wrong. In his imagination, he'd felt vindicated, even triumphant. But now, faced with her genuine remorse, he felt only a deep sadness for everything they'd lost. It's not all on you, he said quietly. I wasn't easy to live with after I came back. I shut you out when I should have let you in. Catherine wiped her tears. Jalen misses you. He won't come home. He's staying with my sister. He says he doesn't want to be under the same roof as Ronald anymore. He can stay with me, Elijah offered. If that's okay with you, Catherine nodded. I think that would be best for now. She hesitated, then added, those men who've come to town, the SEALs, they're here for you, aren't they? Yes, Elijah confirmed. They're old friends. Friends you saved, Catherine said. I read about it online. 6 Navy SEALs trapped behind enemy lines, a lone Army sergeant who went back for them against orders. Her voice softened. You never told me the whole story. It wasn't something I wanted to relive, Elijah admitted, and afterward with the reprimand, it felt like a failure more than a victory. Catherine looked at him with new understanding. You're a hero, Elijah. Our son always knew it, even when I forgot. She turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm proud of the man you are. I always have been, even when I was too hurt to show it. As she drove away, Elijah felt a weight lifting. Not completely, but enough to stand a little straighter. He turned to find Jalen standing in the doorway, his young face solemn. Mom was crying, he observed. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they realize they've made mistakes, Elijah explained. Jalen nodded thoughtfully. She said I could stay with you for a while. Is that okay? More than okay, Elijah assured him. Can I meet your SEAL friends? The ones who came to help you? Elijah smiled. Sure. They're looking forward to meeting you too. Later that day, Jalen stood wide-eyed as the 6 former SEALs greeted him with the same respect they showed his father. Cole presented him with a worn patch that had once been attached to Elijah's uniform. Your father earned more respect than any man I've served with, Cole told him seriously. He came for us when no one else would. Never forget that. Jalen clutched the patch tightly, his face glowing with pride. I won't, he promised. That evening, as the sun set over the town, Jalen asked to visit his school. I want to practice my song on the real piano, he explained. The one in the auditorium sounds different from yours. Elijah drove him there, using the key principle Sloan had given him during their meeting. The school was eerily quiet after hours, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. In the darkened auditorium, Jalen sat at the grand piano on the stage, his small figure illuminated by a single spotlight that had been left on. He began to play, his young voice rising clear and strong as he sang about a man in uniform, about courage and sacrifice, about a father's love that transcended absence. As the final notes faded, Jalen looked up to find his father watching from the front row, eyes bright with unshed tears, and behind him, Sitting silently in the back row like guardians were the 6 SEALs, men who had traveled across the country to stand beside the man who had once saved their lives. "That was beautiful, Jalen," Elijah said, his voice rough with emotion. Jalen smiled. "It's for you, Dad, and for them." He nodded toward the SEALs. "For everyone who serves." In that moment, in the quiet darkness of the empty auditorium, something shifted. A healing that began not with grand gestures or public apologies, but with a boy's song and the silent strength of men who understood the true meaning of honor. Town Hall stood at the center of Main Street, its red brick facade and white columns a picture of small-town Americana. This morning, however, the usual tranquility was disrupted by news vans, reporters with microphones, and a crowd of curious onlookers gathered on the steps. Inside, Ronald Davis stood at a podium, his campaign manager hovering nervously nearby. Ronald adjusted his tie and flashed his practiced smile as cameras flashed. "I want to address the unfortunate situation that occurred at Lincoln Elementary's talent show," he began, his voice smooth and controlled. "While I understand emotions are running high, we need to remember that school safety protocols exist for a reason." A reporter raised her hand. "Mr. Davis, is it true that you personally had Master Sergeant Ward's name removed from the guest list?" Ronald's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's absolutely false. As I've stated, this was a procedural issue, not a personal one." "Then how do you explain the arrival of 6 Navy SEALs in town? They're claiming Sergeant Ward saved their lives during a classified mission." "With all due respect," Ronald replied, his tone hardening, "the presence of these military personnel appears to be nothing more than an intimidation tactic. This is a transparent attempt to damage the school's reputation and, by extension, my campaign." The words hung in the air for a moment before the room erupted with questions. Ronald raised his hands, calling for quiet. "I have nothing but respect for our veterans," he continued, "but using military connections to pressure a local school board is inappropriate and concerning." Across town at the community center, Reaper Cole watched the press conference on a laptop, his expression darkening with each word Ronald spoke. "This guy's unbelievable," he muttered, typing rapidly. But he just made a critical mistake. The other SEALs gathered around his computer as he pulled up a series of encrypted emails. "I've been digging through the communications between Davis and the school board. Look at this exchange from the day before the talent show." The email thread clearly showed Ronald writing to a board member. "Ward presents a significant public image risk. His presence would contradict our community standards initiative. Please ensure appropriate measures are taken." The board member had replied, "Are you sure? His son is performing. This could backfire." Ronald's response was damning. "I'll take full responsibility if questions arise. Just make the necessary adjustments to the entry protocol." "Send this to Ghost," Commander Ellis ordered. "He's meeting with that JAG attorney today." Meanwhile, in a quiet coffee shop across town, Michael Ghost Moreno sat with Caroline Parker, a retired JAG attorney who now specialized in civil rights cases. "These emails constitute clear evidence of discriminatory practices," Caroline said, reviewing the documents Moreno had provided. "And if this guest risk tier system can be definitively linked to racial or military status profiling, you've got grounds for a formal complaint." "We're not looking to sue," Moreno clarified. "We just want the school district to acknowledge what happened, issue a public apology, and implement policy changes to ensure it doesn't happen again." Caroline nodded thoughtfully. "A reasonable approach. But be prepared for resistance. Small towns like this, they protect their own, especially someone as connected as Ronald Davis." As they spoke, Jalen Ward was making his own impact. Sitting in Elijah's living room, the boy had recorded a spoken-word poem about his father's experience. With the help of Shade Nguyen, who had a background in digital media, they uploaded the video to several social platforms. Jalen's voice, clear and passionate despite his youth, cut through the political noise. "My father wears his uniform with pride, but some only see the color of his skin. They call him a risk, a threat, an outsider, when all he's ever done is serve and protect. They took his name off a list, as if they could erase his sacrifice. But you cannot erase a hero. You cannot silence the truth. I am my father's son, and I will not be silenced. The raw emotion in the boy's words, combined with images of Elijah in uniform and footage from the talent show incident, resonated with viewers. Within hours, the video had thousands of shares, comments pouring in from military families across the country who had experienced similar treatment. The school board, already under pressure from the community backlash, called an emergency closed-door meeting. 12 members sat around a polished oak table, faces tense as they debated their response. "We need to issue a public apology," argued Sarah Jenkins, one of the newer members. "The evidence against Ronald is overwhelming, and the publicity is only getting worse." "An apology admits guilt," countered William Foster, the board president and a longtime friend of Ronald's family. "We could open ourselves up to legal action." "We're already facing potential legal action," Sarah shot back. "Caroline Parker is involved now. She doesn't take on cases she can't win." The debate grew heated, voices rising as members took sides. Finally, Sarah stood, removing her board pin and placing it on the table. "I cannot be part of an organization that values image over integrity," she announced. "I hereby resign my position." Another member, Mark Tanner, stood as well. "I'm with Sarah. This has gone too far." As the two walked out, leaving the remaining board members in stunned silence, the situation had reached a breaking point. While these events unfolded, Commander Ellis requested a private meeting with Elijah at the Veterans Memorial Park. The two men walked among the stone monuments, their conversation shielded by the sound of a nearby fountain. "Ronald's not just political, he's personal," Ellis explained, his weathered face grave. "We've uncovered communications going back months. He's been systematically working to minimize your role in Jalen's life." Elijah stopped walking, his expression hardening. "What are you saying?" "He's been using his position on the school board to flag you as a security concern, limiting your access to school functions, parent-teacher conferences, even suggesting to Jalen's teachers that they should be cautious about your involvement." "On what grounds?" Elijah demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. "Your service record, specifically, the reprimand you received after Fallujah." Ellis met Elijah's gaze directly. "Somehow he got access to sealed military documents." "That's not possible. Those records were classified. For someone with the right connections, nothing is truly classified." Ellis placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "He's trying to erase you from your son's life entirely." The revelation hit Elijah like a physical blow. All the subtle changes over the past year, the decreased time with Jalen, the school's growing reluctance to include him in activities, Catherine's increasing distance, suddenly made sense. That evening, Catherine found herself drawn to Ronald's home office, a room she rarely entered. His words at the press conference had stirred something in her, doubts that had been growing since the talent show incident. The office was meticulously organized, every paper in its place, every book perfectly aligned on the shelves. Catherine hesitated, then began opening drawers. In the third drawer of the filing cabinet, behind folders labeled Campaign Finances, she found a thick manila envelope. Inside was a copy of Elijah's military reprimand, the official documentation of his disciplinary action after disobeying orders in Fallujah. Paperclipped to it were notes in Ronald's handwriting, outlining ways to use this information to question Elijah's stability and reliability. Catherine's hands trembled as she read further. Notes about school board policies that could be adapted to limit Elijah's access, suggestions for subtle ways to influence Jalen's perception of his father, a long-term strategy to position Ronald as the only stable male figure in the boy's life. She made copies of everything, her heart pounding, then carefully replaced the originals exactly as she had found them. When Ronald returned home that night, Catherine greeted him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, the copied documents hidden safely in her purse. The next morning, she drove to Elijah's house, the evidence of Ronald's manipulation weighing heavily in her bag. She found Elijah, on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise. "We need to talk," she said without preamble, placing the folder on the small table between them. Elijah flipped through the pages, his expression darkening with each revelation. "How long have you known about this?" "I just found it last night," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "Elijah, I swear I had no idea he was doing this. I knew he was controlling, but this—" She gestured helplessly at the papers. "This is calculated, cruel." Elijah closed the folder, his movements deliberate, controlled. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because it's wrong," Catherine said simply. "Because Jalen deserves better. Because—" She paused, meeting his eyes directly. "Because despite everything, you're a good man and a good father. You always have been." After Catherine left, promising to move her things out of Ronald's house that day, Elijah sat for a long time, the folder on his lap, thinking about all that had been taken from him, and all that could still be salvaged. Meanwhile, Ronald's carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. Investigative reporters, tipped off by the viral video and subsequent controversy, had begun digging into his past. They uncovered previous incidents during his tenure on the Housing Commission, complaints about discriminatory practices that had been quietly settled out of court. As the afternoon faded into evening, Ronald found himself alone in the school auditorium, ostensibly preparing for a campaign event. In reality, he was seeking a moment of quiet reflection, away from the increasingly hostile questions and scrutiny. The sound system suddenly crackled to life, startling him. Jalen's voice filled the empty space, his spoken-word poem echoing across the rows of empty seats. Ronald stood frozen, listening to the boy's passionate defense of his father, feeling the weight of his own actions pressing down on him. For the first time, doubt crept into Ronald's mind. Had he gone too far? Had his ambition blinded him to the human cost of his actions? But it was too late for second thoughts. The wheels he had set in motion were now turning against him, gathering momentum with each passing day. The community center buzzed with activity as volunteers hung banners, arranged chairs, and tested sound equipment. At the center of it all stood the 6 SEALs and Elijah, coordinating what had evolved from a simple protest into a full-blown community event. "Honor and Voice," read the main banner stretching across the stage. Below it, in smaller letters, "A talent showcase for unity and respect." "We've got confirmations from 3 local news stations," Nguyen reported, checking his tablet, "plus about 200 RSVPs from community members, veterans groups, and families from the school." Elijah nodded, surveying the transformation of the modest community center. "Jalen's nervous about performing. It's a big stage." "Kid's got guts," Doc Ramirez said confidently. "Just like his old man." The doors opened, and Principal Diana Sloan entered, carrying a stack of programs. She had been reinstated the previous day, following a public outcry over her temporary suspension. "These just came from the printer," she announced, setting the programs on a nearby table. "And I've confirmed that all the technical requirements for the performances are in place." She paused, looking around at the bustling preparations. "I want to thank all of you, not just for organizing this, but for reminding us what service really looks like." The event had quickly grown beyond its original purpose as a response to the talent show incident. Now it represented something larger, a celebration of service, of community, of the values that transcended politics and personal agendas. That afternoon, a local television station ran a special segment on Elijah. The reporter had pieced together his story through interviews with former commanding officers, the SEALs he had saved, and community members who had witnessed the recent events. For the first time, the full story of the Fallujah mission was made public, the impossible odds, the lives at stake, the difficult choice Elijah had made. The report concluded with footage of Jalen's spoken-word poem, the boy's passionate defense of his father moving many viewers to tears. By evening, the hashtags #Stand with Ward and Honor and Voice were trending nationally. The mayor, sensing the shift in public opinion, issued a proclamation declaring the upcoming Saturday Sergeant Elijah Ward Day in honor of his courage and service. Ronald, meanwhile, found himself increasingly isolated. Campaign donors began withdrawing their support, citing concerns about the negative publicity. Former allies distanced themselves, refusing to return his calls. His carefully constructed public image was crumbling, revealing the manipulative ambition beneath. In a desperate attempt to salvage his reputation, Ronald hired a crisis management team. They advised a damage control campaign focusing on Ronald's commitment to school safety and concerns about protocol, not the individual. But the strategy fell flat. At a hastily arranged press conference, reporters asked pointed questions about the guest risk tier system and the leaked emails. Ronald's responses sounded rehearsed, hollow. The public had already made up their minds. Though, night before the Honor and Voice event, Elijah and Jalen sat at the piano in Elijah's living room, rehearsing the song Jalen had written. The boy's fingers moved confidently over the keys, his voice stronger now, bolstered by the support he had received from the community. As the final notes faded, Elijah placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You don't need to be like me," he said, softly. "You already surpassed me." Jalen looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "I fought my battles with weapons," Elijah explained. "You fight yours with words and music. That takes a different kind of courage, the kind that builds rather than destroys." Jalen considered this for a moment. "But I want to be brave like you, Dad." "You are," Elijah assured him. "Braver than you know." Across town, Catherine stood in the driveway of what had been her home with Ronald, supervising as the last of her belongings were loaded into a moving truck. She had found a small apartment near Elijah's house, a temporary arrangement while she figured out her next steps. Ronald appeared in the doorway, watching her. "You're making a mistake," he called. "Think about what you're giving up." Catherine turned to face him, her expression resolute. "I already gave up too much when I let you come between my son and his father." "He's unstable," Ronald insisted. "You know that. The PTSD, the nightmares. He's healing," Catherine corrected him. "And he's never been anything but honest. With me, with Jalen, with himself." She removed her wedding ring and placed it on the hood of Ronald's car. "That's more than I can say for you." The next morning, the auditorium at the community center was completely transformed. Military and community banners hung side by side, creating a tapestry of unity and respect. Volunteers had worked through the night, arranging seating for hundreds, setting up sound and lighting systems, preparing refreshments. Veterans began arriving early, many in uniform, forming a line that stretched around the block. Families from the school came next, then community members, journalists, even a few state politicians sensing an opportunity to align themselves with a popular cause. Officer Bell, who had resigned from his security position following his public testimony about the guest list tampering, arrived in civilian clothes. He took a seat near the back, nodding respectfully to the SEALs who acknowledged his presence with subtle appreciation for his courage in coming forward. As the seats filled, the excitement in the room was palpable. This was no longer just about righting a wrong done to one man. It had become a statement about the kind of community they wanted to be. Backstage, Elijah adjusted his dress uniform one last time, making sure every medal and ribbon was perfectly aligned. Catherine appeared at his side, more relaxed than he had seen her in years. "You look very handsome," she said, straightening his collar slightly. "Jalen's so proud of you." "We both are." Elijah smiled, the gesture coming more easily now. "Thank you for what you did, coming forward with those documents. It couldn't have been easy." "It was the right thing to do," she said simply. "I should have done it sooner." In another corner of the backstage area, Jalen was going through his own preparations, running through the lyrics of his song one more time. The SEALs had given him a small patch bearing their unit insignia, which he had pinned to his shirt collar. It gleamed under the lights, a symbol of the unexpected alliance that had formed around his father. Commander Ellis approached, resplendent, in his dress uniform adorned with medals from decades of service. "Your father saved my life," he told Jalen quietly, "but you might have saved his soul." Jalen looked up, not fully understanding but sensing the importance of the moment. "I just wanted people to know who he really is." "Mission accomplished, son," Ellis said with a rare smile. "Mission accomplished." As the final preparations were made, Elijah visited a small VR installation set up in a side room of the community center. A veteran-turned-artist had created a virtual reality experience of the memorial site in Fallujah, where Elijah had saved the SEALs years ago. Elijah slipped on the headset and found himself standing in the desert, the sun setting over distant mountains. Before him stood a simple stone marker, inscribed with the names of those who had fallen and those who had survived. For the first time since that fateful day, Elijah allowed himself to fully feel the weight of what had happened. The lives lost, the lives saved, the cost of the choices he had made. A single tear traced its way down his weathered cheek as he finally began to make peace with his past. When he emerged from the VR room, the SEALs were waiting for him, formed up in a line like an honor guard. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence said everything. Backstage, Jalen waited nervously, peeking through the curtain at the packed auditorium. Elijah joined him, adjusting his son's tie with careful hands. "No matter what happens out there," he said softly, "we walk out proud." Jalen nodded, drawing strength from his father's presence. "Together," he agreed. As the lights dimmed and the crowd fell silent, father and son stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next, not just as individuals, but as part of something larger than themselves, a family, a community, a legacy of honor that no one could erase. The Honor and Voice event began with a solemn moment of silence for all veterans who never returned home. The audience of over 300 people rose to their feet as one, heads bowed in respect. At the back of the auditorium, the 6 SEALs stood in perfect formation, their postures rigid, eyes fixed straight ahead. Principal Diana Sloan stepped to the microphone as the silence concluded. "Today we gather not just to right a wrong, but to celebrate the values that bind us together as a community: courage, integrity, and respect." Her voice was steady, carrying to every corner of the packed room. "I want to thank everyone who helped make this event possible, especially Master Sergeant Elijah Ward and his fellow servicemen." A round of applause filled the auditorium. Diana waited for it to subside before continuing. "Our first performer today needs no introduction. He has shown us that sometimes the strongest voice belongs to the youngest among us." The spotlight shifted to the center of the stage where Jalen Ward sat at a gleaming black piano. The boy took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the audience until he found his father sitting in the front row, a small nod passing between them. Jalen's fingers touched the keys, drawing out the opening notes of "The Man in Uniform." The melody was simple but haunting, rising and falling like waves of emotion. When he began to sing, his clear young voice carried a weight beyond his years. "He stands tall in pressed blue fabric, medals telling stories I've yet to hear. My father, the soldier, the hero, fighting battles far and near. But the hardest fight wasn't overseas. It was coming home to a world unchanged, to people who couldn't understand the weight of memories unrestrained." As Jalen sang, many in the audience were moved to tears. The lyrics blended pride, pain, and redemption in a way that resonated deeply. Parents held their children closer, veterans nodded in recognition, and even hardened journalists found themselves swallowing hard against unexpected emotion. The final verse addressed the incident directly. They tried to turn him away, to make him invisible, to break his pride. But a uniform isn't what makes the man. It's the honor he carries inside. As the last notes faded, a profound silence filled the auditorium. Then, as if by some unspoken signal, the audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. Jalen's face broke into a smile of relief and pride. The applause was still echoing when the spotlight suddenly shifted to the rear entrance. The doors swung open, and Elijah Ward entered in full dress uniform, his medals catching the light. The audience, already standing, fell silent in awe. The contrast with his previous humiliation could not have been more stark. Elijah walked down the center aisle with measured steps, his back straight, his gaze fixed forward. The 6 SEALs fell in behind him, forming an honor guard. As he passed each row, people stepped back respectfully, many offering small nods or salutes. Diana Sloan moved from her seat on stage, stepping down to personally escort Elijah to the front row. As they passed the seat where Ronald Davis sat, rigidly, his face a mask of contained fury, Diana deliberately offered Elijah her own seat in the front. The symbolism was not lost on anyone present. The man who had been denied entry was now being honored above all others. Just as Elijah took his seat and the event was about to continue, a shrill alarm pierced the air. The fire alarm had been triggered, its insistent wailing causing immediate confusion. Security personnel moved quickly to the exits, checking for signs of actual danger. "Please remain calm," Diana called over the noise. "Security is investigating. There's no need to evacuate yet." People looked around nervously. The perfect moment disrupted. In the chaos, few noticed Ronald slipping something back into his pocket, a smug satisfaction briefly crossing his face before he composed himself again. But one person did notice. Tiffany Wright, a 15-year-old student with her phone always at the ready, had been recording the event from her seat near the front. Her camera had caught Ronald's furtive movement, the moment when he pulled the fire alarm and then pretended innocence. She quickly sent the clip to her friend Jason, who was working the sound booth. "Look what I just caught," her text read. Davis pulled the alarm. Jason, watching the footage in disbelief, made an immediate decision. He connected Tiffany's phone to the main projection system and, without warning, displayed the damning video on the large screen behind the stage. The audience gasped collectively as they watched the clear evidence of Ronald's sabotage. Ronald himself froze, suddenly aware that all eyes had turned to him. He stood abruptly, making for the nearest exit. "Mr. Davis," called a firm voice from the side door. Officer Bell, now in civilian clothes, blocked Ronald's path. "I think you should stay until the authorities arrive." Two uniformed police officers, already on site as part of the event security, approached quickly. The fire alarm finally silenced, leaving a ringing emptiness in its wake. "This is ridiculous," Ronald sputtered, his composed facade cracking. "That video proves nothing. I was just checking my phone." "We'll let the security footage sort that out," one officer replied, gesturing toward the cameras mounted in the corners of the room. "Deliberately triggering a false alarm in a public gathering is a serious offense, sir." As Ronald was escorted outside, a mixture of applause and murmurs filled the room. Diana Sloan returned to the microphone, visibly shaken but determined to regain control of the event. "I think we've all seen enough to understand what just happened," she said, her voice steady, despite the circumstances. "But we won't let one person's actions derail what we've come together to celebrate." She paused, looking out at the gathered community, then made a spontaneous announcement. "I'd like to take this moment to share some changes that will be implemented at Lincoln Elementary, effective immediately. Our guest registry will now include any parent or guardian with a connection to a student. No exceptions, no image-based filtering, no discrimination of any kind." The declaration was met with enthusiastic applause. Diana stepped back, gesturing for Catherine to join her at the microphone. Catherine walked to the stage, her posture reflecting a newfound confidence. "I wasn't planning to speak today," she began, her voice soft but clear. "But recent events have taught me the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult." She looked directly at Elijah as she continued. "Co-parenting isn't always easy, particularly when other issues complicate the relationship, but our children deserve parents who can put aside their differences and work together with respect and understanding." Her message resonated deeply with many in the audience, particularly other divorced or blended families struggling with similar challenges. Several nodded in recognition of truths rarely spoken so publicly. "Bitterness and division hurt everyone, but they hurt our children most of all," Catherine concluded. "Today I'm committing to a new beginning, one based on healing and cooperation rather than pain and resentment." As Catherine returned to her seat, Diana announced the next performance. But before the music could begin, Jalen suddenly stood up. "Wait," he called, his young voice carrying surprising authority. "I want my dad to sing the final chorus with me. The song's about him. He should be part of it." All eyes turned to Elijah, who looked momentarily startled by the request. Public performance had never been his strength. Battlefields, not stages, were where he felt most competent. For a moment he hesitated. Then, with the same courage that had carried him through combat, he rose and walked to the piano. Jalen made room on the bench, pride shining in his eyes as his father sat beside him. Jalen began to play again, nodding slightly to indicate when Elijah should join in. At first, Elijah's voice was quiet, uncertain. But as the chorus built, his confidence grew, his deep baritone blending perfectly with his son's clear treble. Stand tall, stand proud, stand true. The uniform doesn't make the man, it's what the man will do. When darkness falls and courage fails, remember who you are, remember who you love. Stand tall, stand proud, stand true. The final note hung in the air like a promise. Then the audience erupted in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, veterans and civilians, all united in the pure emotion of the moment. From above, the camera captured the scene. An auditorium filled with light and unity. The words, "We honor all," projected above the stage, a father and son embracing at the center of it all, surrounded by a community forever changed by their journey. 6 months later, the courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and onlookers as Ronald Davis emerged from his sentencing hearing. His face, once confidently smug, now wore the haggard look of a man whose world had collapsed around him. "Mr. Davis, will you appeal the conviction?" shouted a reporter, thrusting a microphone forward. Ronald ignored the questions, hurrying down the steps toward a waiting car. The charges had been relatively minor in the legal sense: falsifying public records, obstruction, unlawful interference in a public institution, but the court of public opinion had delivered a far harsher verdict. His political career was over, his reputation in tatters. Across town, Elijah sat in his living room, watching the news coverage with mixed emotions. There was no satisfaction in seeing Ronald's downfall, only a sense of closure. The man had tried to erase Elijah from his son's life, using his position and privilege as weapons. Justice had been served, but the victory felt hollow. His phone rang, displaying Commander Ellis's number. "Did you see the news?" Ellis asked when Elijah answered. "Just watching it now," Elijah confirmed. "Good riddance," Ellis said. "But that's not why I'm calling. We've got another invitation for you. Veterans Affairs wants you to speak at their national conference next month." Since the Honor and Voice event, Elijah had received numerous invitations to speak at veterans gatherings, youth events, and community forums across the country. His story had struck a chord, becoming a symbol of resilience and the ongoing struggles many veterans faced upon returning home. "I appreciate it," Elijah said, "but I think I'll pass. I've got other priorities right now." Indeed, Elijah had declined most of the speaking opportunities, choosing instead to focus on what mattered most to him: coaching Jalen's school music group, volunteering at the local VA hospital, and rebuilding his relationship with his son. "I figured you'd say that," Ellis chuckled. "The others send their regards. Reaper is in Arizona now, working on that nonprofit we discussed." The Six SEALs had used their newfound platform to create Ghosts of the Uniform, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting the reputations and rights of wrongfully discredited veterans. Already they had helped several former service members clear their names and access benefits they'd been unjustly denied. After ending the call, Elijah walked to the kitchen where Jalen sat at the table, homework spread before him. At 11, the boy was growing rapidly, his features maturing into a striking blend of both parents. "How's the book coming?" Elijah asked, pouring himself a cup of coffee. Jalen looked up from his notebook, grinning. "Just finished the chapter about the SEALs arriving in town. Mrs. Thompson says my writing is evocative." Following the events that had brought their family into the spotlight, Jalen had begun documenting their story in a journal. What started as personal reflection had evolved into a book project titled Echoes of Honor, chronicling his father's military service and their journey together. His English teacher, recognizing the project's potential, had connected him with a local publisher who specialized in memoirs. Though publication was still years away, the process itself had become a healing experience for both father and son, allowing them to process their experiences through storytelling. Later that afternoon, Elijah drove Jalen to Catherine's apartment for dinner. Their co-parenting relationship had transformed dramatically over the past months, evolving from tense exchanges to genuine cooperation and mutual respect. Catherine greeted them at the door, her smile warm and natural. "Right on time. Dinner's almost ready." Inside, the apartment reflected Catherine's new life, simpler than her previous home with Ronald, but somehow more authentic. Photos of Jalen at various ages adorned the walls, including several recent ones with both parents together at school events. After Ronald's disgrace, Catherine had thrown herself into counseling work, starting a support group for blended families, dealing with military trauma. Her first-hand experience, combined with her compassionate nature, made her uniquely qualified to help others navigate similar challenges. "I saw the news about Ronald," she mentioned, as they sat down to eat. "How do you feel about it?" Elijah shrugged. "It's over, that's what matters. Mom's group is helping lots of families now," Jalen chimed in, deftly changing the subject. "Even Mrs. Turner from my school joined." Catherine smiled gratefully at her son's intuitive understanding. "We're focusing on healing, not dwelling on the past." After dinner, Catherine pulled Elijah aside while Jalen packed his overnight bag. "The community center called today. They want to make it official." Elijah raised an eyebrow questioningly. "The renaming," Catherine explained. "The board voted unanimously. It's going to be the Elijah Ward Resource Center." Elijah shook his head, embarrassed by the recognition. "They don't need to do that." "Yes, they do," Catherine insisted. "What happened changed this town, Elijah. The tutoring programs, the veteran support services, the music programs you've started, they're making a real difference." Indeed, the community center had been transformed, in recent months becoming a hub for education and support services. Elijah had recruited veteran volunteers to provide tutoring for struggling students, while also establishing music programs for youth who couldn't afford private lessons. The following week, a small ceremony was held to unveil the new sign bearing Elijah's name. Despite his reluctance to be in the spotlight, he attended out of respect for the community that had rallied around him when it mattered most. As summer turned to fall, another transformation took place at Lincoln Elementary. Under Superintendent Diana Sloan's leadership, she had been promoted following her handling of the crisis. The school implemented a curriculum unit on modern veterans and moral courage. The centerpiece of this initiative was a mural painted along the side of the school building, depicting Elijah and the 6 SEALs. The artist, a former Marine, had captured not just their likenesses but the essence of their brotherhood, the unspoken bond forged in adversity and strengthened through loyalty. On the first anniversary of the Honor and Voice event, now officially recognized as Elijah Ward Day, Jalen led a student performance beneath the mural. The audience, larger than ever, included veterans from across the state, local families, and media representatives drawn by the story's continuing resonance. Among those present were Officer Bell, now working as a veterans liaison with the police department, and several school board members who had instituted sweeping policy changes to ensure that discrimination could never again be disguised as security protocol. As the years passed, the story of the Black Army Sergeant and the 6 SEALs became part of the town's identity, a testament to the power of standing together against injustice. Children who weren't even born when the events took place grew up, learning about courage and integrity through the example set by Elijah Ward and those who had stood beside him. Jalen eventually published his book, which became required reading in schools across the country. He followed in neither parent's footsteps professionally, instead forging his own path as a composer and advocate for arts education in underserved communities. Catherine's counseling group expanded into a statewide network supporting military families through the unique challenges they faced. Her work earned recognition from the Department of Veterans Affairs, bringing resources and attention to issues that had long been overlooked. And Elijah? He returned to his quiet morning routine, rising, before dawn preparing his coffee, watching the sunrise. But now there was a difference. The weight of isolation had lifted, the memories remained, but they no longer defined him. One bright morning in early spring, 5 years after the events that had changed everything, Elijah sat on his porch, coffee in hand, enjoying the peace of the early hour. The sound of the front door opening broke the silence as Jalen, now 15 and nearly as tall as his father, stepped outside. "Morning, Dad," he said, sitting in the adjacent chair. "Got a big day ahead." Elijah smiled. "The regional music competition, right?" Jalen nodded, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot Elijah had prepared. It was a new ritual they had. Started when Jalen turned 14. Morning coffee and conversation, a quiet moment of connection before the day began. "Wanna come watch?" Jalen asked, though he already knew the answer. "Wouldn't miss it," Elijah replied. It wasn't a grand declaration, just a simple truth between father and son. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the first rays of sunlight spilled over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. No longer in uniform, no longer defined by others' perceptions, they walked forward together, not as sergeant and son, but as equals, bonded by respect and love that no one could ever again attempt to diminish or deny. As they headed toward Elijah's truck, a small group of veterans passed by on their morning walk. They offered respectful nods, which Elijah returned with the easy confidence of a man who had found his place in the world, not through accolades or public recognition, but through the quiet dignity of being exactly who he was meant to be. Was it ever about security protocols, or do we only see honor in those who match our expectations? If this story moved you, like and subscribe for more narratives that challenge us to examine the heroes we celebrate and those we don't.